This is the Take Your Turn 2022 tournament hosted by Groove of War. Groove of War hosts Wargroove commentary and analysis, a link to their channel in the description. Take Your Turn is composed of 3 events, Wargroove, Chess, and Go. And of course, on this channel, we're looking primarily at Go. My name is Arn Fosta. This commentary is aimed at newer players, players in the double-digit Q ranks. If you do spot any mistakes, things we miss, leave them in the comments, let us know. Today we're going to be looking at the round of 8, game 1, between Zeronix playing black and MrCat playing white. And as usual, I have with us today our trusty co-commentator, Just Your Eventual Ruler. Hey, Ruler.
Hi, it's great to be back today.
Yeah, I think this should be a fun game. I'm hoping we can talk a lot about fundamentals in this game. So if we look at the first couple moves, nothing too crazy. We can see that each player is trying to put some establishing moves on the board. If we go back and feel free to jump in, I was just going to say that when we think on the fundamentals, how do we look at a board with all these possibilities? Typically, as you see with all the play with the in this game, the players are playing in these corners because it gives them a good starting position. The corners are generally easier to defend, so it gives you a nice balance between trying to have the ability to make early points and also the ability to still play towards the center, play towards the bigger sides. You have enough space that you can try to make, it's easier to make a lot of points. Versus if you were to try something like playing in, back in the corner here on this second line or even on the edge, you could do that, but you leave yourself with a lot less possibilities to kind of build a structure and a framework. So nothing crazy at the beginning. This is a pretty standard opening, but we get into some fighting really quickly, and that's where I would really love to get, Ruler, some of your thoughts on the way that this begins to pan out. So we
Well,
have, go ahead.
yeah, we have a large enclosure, and generally when you have something that's 2 spaces away in distance, you're tending to build farther. So you're building like a wall in order to try and maybe get a lot of points. You're less interested necessarily in the corner as much as you are having what we call influence, or just stones that we could be stones that could be useful later on, in a fight, for example.
I
And generally, you see all these 3 or 4 points because they're a good balance between being efficient and building the corner and having influence on fights in the center.
I think you make a really excellent point. One of the things I think that we want to be looking for and thinking about again today throughout this is what you just said, the in those fundamentals, how stones that we place down early uh, are going to help us later in the game. And I think that foresight or that planning is going to be a real difference and be a real indicator in how some of the rest of the game plays out. So we just have MrCat sort of setting up on this left hand side, and then we have a jump in. And there were a
Yeah.
couple points I wanted to mention here. So we have the jump in. It looks like MrCat wants to secure. Well, you have 2 choices here. Well, you have many choices, but often you're looking at or two ways we look at it is which direction do you want to defend at. If you're going to defend, do you want to defend at A or at B? And I think MrCat chose to defend at A because we've already got D16, D10. We've already got these stones lined up here. By playing at D4, we're reinforcing our position here and making it easier to start to build this giant wall and make it harder for black to come in and do anything. What did you think as we see black trying to maneuver their way out? What did you think about the Joseki that sort of deviates right here? But what did you think about
Yeah.
black's approach?
The Joseki, the standard sequence, generally, we prefer to see the Sente variation, or the variation that lets us keep initiative here, because it allows you to build or approach on the other side. So, for example, instead of um, directly haneing at e3, you generally extend at e4 instead,
Mm-hmm.
and your opponent still has to respond because so all the way back at what move? 11 or 10, right?
Mm-hmm.
Move 10, instead of doing this Hane, you would just do e4, and that's
Oh,
because
I see what you're saying. Okay, I was looking at different
you pretty
differences.
much always do the Sente variation
Hmm.
nowadays, especially now with like speed go. Like you gotta have fast development because this move still threatens to kill the corner if your opponent doesn't respond, right? So it
Right.
is still something your opponent has to respond to. And you have the luxury of just playing elsewhere because this is thick enough to not have to worry about it getting attacked, especially since you have that center star point stone at d10. It's a nice relationship. You
Mm-hmm.
can go play. So let's say your opponent responds simply, um, and white can play elsewhere at, or well, white if black plays this, white should Hane first just for the better potential, and
Mm-hmm.
black has to respond. Then white plays elsewhere. White would probably approach or enclose, and enclosing seems big here, actually, because you don't want to get pincered here, right? You want to
Right.
build bigger.
Right.
You
That's
build
fair.
you build your big side, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you, I don't know, probably want to play actually the outside even more. You could consider the large knight's enclosure here. Let your opponent live if they want, and
So you would
then
go. Are you talking when you're talking about letting your opponent live? You're looking at.
oh yeah, the standard 3/3 invasion. In this case, that would be c17. Whenever you play the 4/4 point, even though it's considered the optimal move, you don't actually take the corner directly. Usually, what you want to do is naturally make it to where your opponent can't invade that corner by having your opponent, like, for example, if they approach you, you can pincer it, and
Mm-hmm.
then, and by that we mean play a stone on the other side to prevent it from settling.
Yeah. So we're talking about like black's position right now. So if I do, um,
Yeah.
just here,
Well, approach. You could just approach. It doesn't matter.
sure. So
If white
approach.
approaches here,
Mm-hmm.
black would pincer. Black
With
would probably do a higher pincer, actually, not
go
a
with
low
an
pincer here.
M16. Yeah, that's
Uh,
fair.
maybe, yeah, M16, L16 also works.
Okay.
I'd say you want a little more influence. You're building big walls, right? So that one, I think L16 has a better relationship to um to if you like approach. So
Sorry, say that again.
uh L16 has a better
Ah,
relationship to approaching.
approaching the D16 stone.
Yeah,
Right.
with a move like G17. Generally, so this is probably another important thing, a very common thing. G17. Ooh, I misread. I mean, that is a viable move. So generally, when we approach, we either approach at like a knight's move away. So in this case, it'd be
F17. Yeah.
F17.
Okay.
So
Mm-hmm.
F17 is a common move, and then it's also possible to play something higher, and by higher we mean closer to the center. So at F16.
16. Yeah.
Yeah. These are generally your two common options for what we call approaching the stone, which is preventing it from enclosing in one direction. So generally, if black plays an approach move, white has to well, doesn't have to, but generally will respond with an enclosure in the opposite direction. So in this case, C14.
14.
You
Would
want to take the points on the inside here, I would say.
okay. So you would play
You could be
C14.
greedy.
Okay. I was gonna
You could
ask.
get greedy.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah, I think this is standard though. In this position, yeah, I think you definitely consider playing higher here.
With
You don't really
F16 and
care.
yep.
Yeah.
So that's why
Uh,
you.
uh,
Or
this if
you saying white would.
I'm saying white would play higher. And if black plays this, black plays the standard response.
Sure.
Generally, the standard response to what your opponent approaches is how you should respond. So if your opponent approaches with a like knight's move away from your center stone, you should respond with a knight's move. There are circumstances like this one where you would play high because you pretty much control the entire side. You have enough stones, enough influence to say that you own this territory. Theoretically, there's some mean stuff your opponent can do. For example, there's a peep at C15, black can play there, and white wants to connect, right? And then black has the option of playing at C12
See,
or C17. Then you'll get some sort of invasion in.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like really not fun.
That is
Could also
clever.
black could also threaten C16 first, and then play that. But you have threats. Usually, will create a successful invasion, and by invasion we generally mean playing stones in areas that your opponent controls. Generally,
I think
if
this
you have
is
multiple options,
Mhm.
right, you're more likely to be successful.
Right, and I think what you showcase here is something that I think is a good takeaway from this game as well, and a good thing to keep in mind. In that, already in this exchange we have of 11 moves, 12 if you start looking at the variations. You have you see the multi-purpose use of, say, the, like, in particular, like the F8, the F17 stone. It moved number 8, in the way in which it can be used both as to reinforce L16, but it can also turn around and be used to help threaten with that C15 stone. And I think one of the things that is really great about what Ruler is talking about is that in strong play, your stones are doing more than one thing. They're serving multiple purposes, and in many cases, like again that F17 stone up here, it isn't locked into a certain it isn't hard locked into one way that it can be used. So that flexibility, I think, is really crucial and helps to keep the game both dynamic, complex, and give you lots of options. I think conversely, one of the things we'll see in this game is that when you take a more narrow approach, it can be difficult then to adjust and get out of situations that are going to end up being detrimental to you. So that's the really nice thing about something like F17 here, is it has a lot of flexibility. Because of the way Ruler set this up, there's a lot of flexibility in how you would ultimately use it, even potentially going so far as throwing it away and letting it get captured if there's a bigger move. And so the reverse, I think, is a really good thing to look at.
Oh yeah, it's probably good to explain what big is.
Mm-hmm.
So when we define big, what we mean is the amount of potential a move can have. For example, this position right here,
Mm-hmm.
big move. Other than, so let's go through the Sente variation, right? For white,
Sure.
there's a very obvious big move. So black will respond, and then let's say black responds with the normal response here. I think is F12 or F2. F2
F2.
lives on the spot.
Yep. Oh, no, undo
E2.
that.
Yeah, it's one further.
Thank you.
You do this jump. So generally here, white has the choice of immediate. I think you can kind of harass it if you want, but I think you're supposed to just
Tanuki?
Tanuki here.
Yep.
And yeah, Tanuki. By Tanuki we mean play elsewhere. Um, so the biggest move on board. There's two very big spots that pop out to experienced Go players, and that's O17 and R14. This is because they're both approaching a corner that's hasn't had anything done to it.
Mm-hmm.
And when we determine which side is bigger, we look at who controls what side, how developable the move is, and the actual size, like the line difference between the stones. For example, if white plays at R14, the incorrect option, it's not quite as good because black controls this area, so white will probably want to settle somehow. Though with this stone, it's arguably already settled. But black can do some mean things to it if you don't play inside. But this area is also just smaller. If you check the distance between the pincering stone versus where you can develop compared to black's stone, it's actually smaller because there's an enemy stone in the way, right? Whereas if you played at 017 instead, you have about the same distance. However, you also have to include the potential points behind white. This is more harmonious with what with white's structure.
One other thing too, I do want to note, because I know that my brain goes towards that R14. My brain is like, I get very aggressive and go. I just want to like get into my opponent's potential territory and take it apart and be really aggressive. I think one of the things, not that that's wrong, but I think one of the things that Ruler is stresses very well is a really important part of learning Go, of getting those fundamentals down, is building, and it's very fun and very can be very satisfying to attack and make that work. But the primary way that you win the game is to have more points than your opponent. So building territory, building frameworks and structures to get points is obviously the most important. And when we're talking about this early stage of the game, each of these moves, when they're at higher levels, is generally more and more spread out, because what we're looking for is we're looking to set up these distant pieces that are then going to get filled in, and we're going to intentionally fill them in such a way that we can make them work together. And if we start too small, we are going to get ourselves outpaced by our opponent. So I think Ruler makes a really great point in the way in which O17 here works very harmoniously with D16 and starts to help to build you points quicker. One thing I wanted to touch on real quick was, so the way this game did play out, the double Hane. So after the Atari here, MrCat ends up playing it at E2 to play underneath what a more standard Joseki, I think, is if you're going to go this route, one of the more standard Josekis that leaves you in a more even outcome is to go ahead and play at F4 to connect, prevent your stone from getting captured. At that point, black will generally play at H2, and that's to help secure them, get themselves out. And then you have two options. You can go ahead and
G2?
play.
Wasn't it G2? I think you just misspoke the letter. Yeah, it's G2.
Oh, thank you. So
It's
yep,
okay.
yep.
So yeah, you would you Tari, which means threaten to capture a stone, and then you play on the inside. You take another Atari, like white counter Ataris.
Mm-hmm.
Black's only good move in this position would be to take white's stone, and then white is able to extend and then capture the two stones. And this
Right.
is considered standard and actually fine for both sides, because even though black sacrificed two stones, he disrupted all development on the side
Yes.
from the invasion.
The other variation that I saw is just or that was also mentioned or shown up in professional games, is the playing on towards the center, playing F4, where you
Leaves a
choose
co, right?
exactly where it becomes a
Yeah,
co.
okay.
Yep. And so I think so when we look at these different variations and where they're useful, like you were saying, in this variation, white gets the corner, black starts to build that framework to the side. In this other variation, black is getting there's a co-fight to settle things. White is also simultaneously building that framework towards the center. And if
We
we
should
Mhm.
should also, like, once you finish, we should probably also explain why this co is very scary.
Sure, yeah, let's go
Um,
ahead and jump into it.
so this is a very scary co, and for the basics of co's, whenever both players can alternatively capture the stone, um, that we call it a co. There is a basic rule for this, and is that the same board position cannot repeat. So, other than just how that affects normal captures, like snapbacks actually work because of that rule.
Mhm.
Um, but in this case, if white just captures, black cannot immediately capture back. So
Because the board would
black will
return
have
to
to
the
try
exact same
and
way.
make what we call a co-threat.
Hmm.
So black has to make a move that goats white into making a response, because either the trade is equal. So, like for example, if black gives up the co and white wins the corner back,
Sure.
black might get a huge invasion or kill something in exchange.
Hmm.
Um, or it's something that is like a dead group for white. Let's say there's or a live group for white that black can threaten to kill for a black group to resurrect, basically resurrecting dead stones. Um, those are really useful for that because maybe the keeping those stones alive is like really bad for white. Because maybe like what there's a lot of points, right? It's a big dragon.
Hmm.
Um, but
Yeah, I think
for the
it's a.
most part,
Mhm.
yeah, for the most part, it's just have to find moves that threaten to kill or save things, right?
Right. I think
That
that's
are
a great point that I think you make a really great point here with the co and the co threats that I think we've sort of glossed over a lot. But for newer players, you have the mechanics of the co, the fact that the board can't be in the same board state twice in the same game. But because of that, you can create these situations where the life, death, or major point swings are determined by who has won this co. You know, who has whose stones are where they need to be in the right place. And so because you can't just go back and forth forever, as Ruler's saying, it creates this incredible dynamic where in these co-fights where each of you wants to succeed in this local area, you ultimately end up often playing across the board to try to force your opponent to respond to keep this local battle ongoing. And you get these situations where you have like 6 or 7 different fights going because this one fight, this co-fight, is can be so critical towards keeping a group alive, towards winning the game because it's the point difference needed, and so that's one of the other things that this can be useful for. Did you want to add anything else about co's?
Yes. Two major things. One, just because you win a co doesn't mean you are more successful out of the co. That's
Mm.
important to note.
Hmm.
Sometimes you'll misevaluate, right? Saying that, oh, the co is bigger. And in fact, the move that your opponent played may kill a corner in exchange for you killing a smaller corner, for example. Um, it's also important to note that whenever you're playing with a co like this that hasn't started yet, but is going to be a possibility, um, currently it's too small for both sides to actually fill in. If either side does that, the opponent will get a very large move in exchange, a very big move, a point that will, give them a lot of points or potential points rather. And then and because of that, both sides have to keep thinking about what's the way to either create more co-threats or keep my place from not having co-threats. And generally, uh, sides will try and plant what we call aji or taste, meaning like the left behind stones left behind that can still do things. Um, those that aji can be very useful for winning the co because you might have 10, 20 moves of pure co threats because your opponent really needs the corner to win the game, right?
Hmm.
So both players really need to be focusing on what their opponent has like can do inside of them as threats and what they can try and do to create more threats.
Right, right. That's a great point. And so the way the game ended up playing out is instead of so we talked about the in sort of in the path they took there is a more standard Joseki with a couple variations. MrCat deviated from that to go ahead and play at D2, zero takes. MrCat comes under, and so then we get the same thing that we were talking about. We get this co-fight, and then
We
we
get worse
have
shape.
right.
So by shape, what we mean is the formation of the stones is worse for white, and for the most part, it's mostly intuition. That's actually technically it is bad shape because there's two empty triangles, but there's two full triangles and it's two.
Yeah.
Anyways, this is worse shape because the two white stones right there are actually much weaker now, and by that, there's a shortage of liberties on them. If black can get another move there, black can kind of harass them for a few turns. For example, by playing something like D4 or no B4. B4 would be really annoying to deal with from white because that's undercutting the group and threatens to ladder them.
Hmm.
And by ladder, could probably show that out as we're
Sure. So if we do,
explaining.
yeah. Um,
So, to put simply, ladder is just a thick and go from a special formation that
mhm.
continuously threatens to capture a group
Right.
until it runs to the edge of the board, and then you're able to actually capture it. Force.
So for
Um,
simplicity's sake, I'm reversing the. We were talking
yeah,
about
you're
black.
reversing the ladder.
I'm
Yeah,
reversing the ladder, but like it is ruler saying, the ladder here is starting because this stone is put into Atari. It only has a single liberty left. It's one move away from being captured. So black has to. In this case, black would try to keep keep placing stones there, and if they do that, this ladder is set up such that every time black tries to get out, get more liberties, get more space to make life, white's next move can keep them at one liberty. And as ruler's
yeah.
saying, in this case, the ladder means that that process can continue indefinitely all the way down till eventually being captured. And it doesn't require the corner of the board, but this is a convenient example.
And if you don't know what liberty means, it's just the points outside of a stone or a group of stone. So in this case, there's only one point that the black stone has before white can capture it. So that's that stone has what we call one liberty. So that's why this works. It's perpetually putting a group of stones into one liberty, and that means white can eventually capture it because of how the formation works.
Speaking of which,
Um,
quick aside on that, a natural question might be, what do you do when you spot this? Ideally, the quicker you spot this, the quicker you avoid playing into it. There are
Ooh,
obviously
yeah,
exceptions in which there may be something you can get out of it, but unless you are intentionally trying to create the ladder against yourself for some reason, if there's something larger at play, if you spot this, once this ladder starts, as long as you've read it out correctly, because they can be very long and they can be many moves, but as long as you've read it out correctly and you see that you will lose, then then you don't have to play into it.
well, yeah, yeah. You don't you playing more into it actually always benefits your opponent as long as there's no other reason for playing it.
Right.
Assuming it's a purely losing ladder,
Right.
because it just gives your opponent more stones in the board, and your stones are going to die no matter what.
Yeah.
So generally, you just play away, or hear me out. You can play a ladder breaker, and these are forcing moves that interrupt the ladder's pathing. So, for example, we can actually flip it in this case, right? Um, ladder doesn't work for white if so let's say white Tanuki. So white plays at 07.
Sure. Oh,
No,
seven.
black plays the ladder. So
Oh,
black's going to play the ladder for this example. So black plays the ladder at A.
yep. Oh, and then white
White Tanuki's
Tanuki's. Oh, at
White
07.
Tanuki's at
Sure, sure.
017. It's a
017.
natural.
That makes more sense.
Black starts the ladder.
You want to go?
I mean, black would normally start there, but just
Yeah.
for the argument, just for the sake of argument, we're going to flip it the other way.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh,
It's
I
just a
see. Oh, I see
hypothetical.
what you're saying. Okay. Sorry. Sorry. Sorry.
Yeah.
Right.
So white has a ladder breaker at E15 to start leaning on the stone. That's a potential
Mhm.
ladder breaker. Or even playing at just extending straight from the stone at, I think, O15 breaks the ladder too. I'd have to read it out. But you can play moves around your opponent's other group which threaten to kill it. Right? If you get an
Right.
extra move there, especially if you play like EP15, that indirectly threatens to just seal in the group with another approach if your opponent captures the stone. So let's
Mm-hmm.
say white plays P15, black
Sure.
captures the stone now, and then white double approaches now.
At
This is a very strong threat. Black is basically dead here, or pretty close to it. It's, I think, maybe co. You can do some very mean things here.
Right.
And as you can see, Black gained some influence, but Black really only gained about a pretty small corner, and it's very concentrated compared to White's group on the top right, which is a lot more. It has more influence everywhere, and isn't really directly muted compared to Blackstone.
Right.
Blackstones,
Right. And I did want to mention, because you were talking about, so if we really quickly we do 17. So
the quicker way to the quicker way is to do every pair of stones. So you can actually just mark it with an X, right?
Yeah.
So you can play it out.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and play it out just but that's a good point. Whoops. And
you people, whenever you get slightly better at the game, you're taught to count in pairs and then count the groups, because this is a pattern that you can like the formation's a pattern. Yeah, in this case, it doesn't break the ladder.
It doesn't break. So in this case, you would get captured, but then
but we know this now, right? We know in this position, White can't really play like this. Right. So instead of this, what if there was a stone at 016? This is what we do. This is why reading is useful. So if Black plays this way,
we're gonna be real. We're gonna see if I can do this without making mistakes. No promises.
If you do, we can just edit it, and then they'll know. But
that's right. Nobody will know.
Nobody will notice. Yeah, and now White plays there, and they've gained three liberties. Yeah, I was about to say 4. No, 3 liberties.
Mm-hmm.
Now they have a total of 4, and they're no longer put in Atari. But now you have to look. Black has a bunch of what we call cutting points, where if White plays there, Black will be split into 2 groups. Because of this, Black will have. This is a bad result for Black because White will continually threaten to capture in split groups and get something out of it, especially since their stones have more liberties than the vast majority of Black stones. As you can see, all of Black's stones that were laddering White only have 2 liberties, where White has 4 now, meaning White will win all capturing races regardless of who goes first.
And I think this is definitely one of those things where one of those instances in which that preparation, like really you're saying, the reading, the preparation can be so critical. This move 016 is on the complete opposite side of the board.
What if they play E6 as the ladder? So they start the ladder, right? White goes. I think you didn't do the optimal variation. It plays E6 and then play F6. Not F6, D6, then E6. So White plays to extend the ladder one further.
To extend it.
So no, you're right. That's the first move, and then Black plays on top again. I think this doesn't work for White anymore because it becomes the same situation. Let's see. And then it's an L group. So I think it actually does work for White.
I don't.
Okay, wait. So this is a tick 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 tick, trying to figure out the group. So it's an L. So take the third from the top at N13 and make an L. Or actually just 2 white stones. Really, 2 white stones.
Yep. Sorry, L.
And the group is an L. It's an N. N13. You take 2 white stones. They go forward in this case. So that way. And then 2 black stones on the outside. So not that way. It'd be on P13.
P13.
And then I think they're capturing on top, so it'd be in 14. So this is the pattern. This is the group that we repeat, right? So now White will continue playing from here. Okay, White gets out. Barely. I have to read 2 variations for this ladder.
White gets out because this White now has 2 liberties, but also White has 2 liberties in this moment. Black is then put in this 015 stone is in Atari, so Black either
Yeah,
loses the stone and then white gets out, or has to fix and connect, and in so doing allows white to get another connect their stones and therefore have more than one liberty, and suddenly they're safe. Yeah,
yeah. Well, I think it's pretty good to show it out. So right now, if
sure.
black tries to put the group in Atari, now at let's say P15, right? Oh, you're dead, right? White will capture, and then if black Ataris again from the outside, white will connect, and white has at least 3 liberties and has a pretty easy time running away. If black fixes, white will connect to his stone, and then we'll have 4 liberties. White again, black will have all those cutting points.
Right.
We're just imagining this is farther away.
Right. So we're imagining that all of this, we've played out this ladder. So all of we like we did earlier, and so all those cutting points would then exist. Yep. If we go back and take a look then at the way things played out, I think this is another good example here of Zero extends with B3. MrCat goes to follow.
So he's just going to kill the bottom 2. So it's important to note that white's group, that plus on the bottom, is dead. Black will be able to capture it, probably by playing at D2 at some time. No, C2, C2.
C2.
C2. Weird, because what Lewis and mine, no, it's just the board I have. It has both coordinates, and Lewis's doesn't.
Oh, it has it on both sides. That probably would be helpful. I keep going off of.
I'm like looking at your
off.
board. I should be looking at my board.
So
makes it easier.
So the thing here that's interesting to me is that Zero makes a choice here to sacrifice the inner stones in order to take the outside edge. So now this group of 4 stones that was originally dead, they're now alive. They're now safe.
I actually disagree with what Zero played here. I think he should have killed the bottom group, because you can just invade whatever white does.
You feel like there's enough space. So
there's enough space on the so assuming that white will fix here, like let's just say black goes down, and let's say that's guaranteed dead, right? Maybe it's not. Maybe I misread, but let's assume it is dead for now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Black plays this.
Right, if black plays
play
here,
this, and then white will. Yeah. You can create an eye, I think. No. Yes.
I think.
So
you
what
have
about
to play
A2?
A2.
What about A2?
So if you do,
I think you die like this, but they can't. Well, okay. Well, first you gotta. So this is complicated reading. Not really, but trying. So the variation I'm reading is A2. White allows us to capture, so they Atari us to force us to capture at C1. And black captures at A4, and then I don't see how white kills you here. The best attempt is B1, I think, right?
Yes, but
and black doesn't even need to play there yet.
No.
Oh, no, yeah, black does need to play there, actually. Should play there. Black plays there. White has to fix if they want to capture.
So white can't play at A1 because they would just get captured. But if they try...
It's important that this is like a very common thing in corners, that you have to be very careful about stones on the first line, whether they get killed or not.
I think white would want to consider A5, right?
Yeah, I think might be a co now. But
conversely,
it's a big co. That's not a co. White would just capture. So maybe that's not the move. This is why I wouldn't have just. That's why I didn't want to extend, right? It just gets you extra captured here.
Well, but if you extend...
No, I mean like extend at B3.
Oh.
I would have turned. Or even Hanade, I think. I think Hanade was stronger because it directly threatens to kill the other group. Ooh, no, it goes into that ladder, though. Remember? That's why.
Yeah.
So maybe turn? I don't know. I'd have to read it out. So maybe this was dead. Either way,
I think it definitely requires some additional reading. So I wouldn't. I want to do a little bit more myself. If we look at
we'll do
how
it
it
after.
if we look at how it ended up playing out, we do see that Zero made the call to give Mr. Cat the corner in exchange to building towards the outside, having a bunch of stones that were going to be able to ideally work toward the center and or start to be useful up on this left hand side. So, to remove White's ability to easily create anything right here. Granted, you've still got
And
a
it
D10
also
stone, so it's not like there's nothing that's possible.
it's also very useful for defense because it allows you to attack any invading group on the bottom.
Right.
It also allows you to run stones into that wall if White decides to make a weak group or a group that isn't directly alive or settled.
So there's this exchange I think I wanted to get your thoughts on as well. So you have Zero coming in here and saying, I don't want to let you take this left hand side easily. I'm going to play underneath your D10 stone. I'm going to play C10 and I'm going to try to create some chaos here in order to see what I can get. Yeah, go ahead.
Personally, I think this is wrong direction if you're going to attach. I think there's a better option. So if you want to invade, there's an invasion at D13 and C13, both which should live in this case. Both are options. But if you want to attach to maybe get some free moves, you would want to attach at D9. And this is just because it works better with your stone at the bottom. White has less options, and then I don't know. It's just tougher for White to do anything. You could also consider the armpit hit at C9 be an armpit hit because it's under.
There we go.
I think those are I think those are the options I would consider. I'd probably. My first instinct is to play C right here, lean on this.
Play a little
So
higher.
it might just be bigger to
jump straight in.
Approach. Yeah, or just approach. I wouldn't invade. This is it feels too early to invade. I think it's not good timing. You would usually want to invade as late as possible because usually that means your opponent has invested more into making the territory points. So if you invade later, your opponent has invested more and got less from it.
Fair point. If we look, we have. I think Mr. Cat was. I'm curious about, and obviously we don't have Mr. Cat here, so we don't know exactly what they were thinking. I'm guessing that they were looking to try and cut off this C10 stone from this these black stones on row 5 here. But I think that if as we see the way that Zero ends up playing this, it ends up creating this situation where Zero's just going to take everything underneath.
Zero doesn't need to jump here, I don't think.
You think it's enough to...
He doesn't need to jump like that. He can just directly attach, which is Sente. I would actually probably directly attach and then Tanuki. Not extend, attach at C16.
Oh.
Then the wedge becomes annoying for both sides, right? And even if White pushes now, so let's say White wedges in between the two.
Mm-hmm.
Black takes, or Black Ataris, White fixes. I mean, I don't like this result for Black purely because White has so much influence now. White can start getting really aggressive and just try and hope that they can get all the points on the inside. So I think there's enough space for Black to, if White gets too aggressive.
Right.
Either way, this feels a little bit unbalanced for Black. However, it's not bad.
I'm guessing that may be why Zero ended up going for the B16, trying to avoid that kind of press down. I don't know whether it was necessary, but that may be some of the reasoning for sort of the difference between a B16 and a C16 play.
The issue came from invading too early. This is why I don't like the invasion, because white gets a bunch more power on the outside and influence, and can now start actually threatening to do a bunch of stuff really quickly. So I think that's why it's bad. Attaching directly is just a move that allows you to play away.
Right. I think it's a good point too. This gives now white has a large wall that can be used very focused towards the center and can be used in a lot of different ways. Conversely, if there's for Zero's end, ideally this comes out with at least some points. I don't know whether so. I think it's a fair argument to say whether or not it's actually enough, but since Zero is against the side, if Zero is going to grab anything from this, it's going to be some easy points in this space here.
It just feels like if white gets an extra move to fix some of their problems, like there's a potential, like if white gets a ladder breaker, there's a potential ladder at e5 that's kind of scary for black. White is starting to threaten a lot now.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a very scary cut for black to deal with if they don't want to fix it. So I don't know. It's tough. It's not. I think black is still winning here. Black just looks to have better development overall. White's kind of pigeonholed in the bottom left corner, and do have a very strong group, but it's going to be hard to develop now since there's more stones on the board.
Right. So from here we see. So this is a.
I love bullying people for making empty triangles.
This is yeah. Go ahead.
So very quickly, place a Kosumi on the board or somewhere. Just a diagonal jump, I should say.
A diagonal jump somewhere.
Yeah, just anywhere. It doesn't matter. Just 2 white stones and a diagonal.
Oh, sorry. In a diagonal.
Yeah. So yeah, this is a diagonal jump, sometimes referred to as a Kosumi, and certain variations. Either way, this is considered fine shape because it's guaranteed connect. These stones are guaranteed connected, and that's because if black tries to split them off, it will be able to fix on the other side, and it makes actually good shape. It makes a full triangle is what we call it. If you play there and then there, yeah. The reason this is good is because it's the most efficient way to take liberties away from black while remaining strong yourself. Or not necessarily. It's the most solid way to take away liberties, I should say. You can technically form a tiger's eye if you want, and that's more efficient. But there's more defects. There's peeps and things that black can do. Either way, in terms of keeping it's connected, right? That's the main strength.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you play it prematurely, it's like you played a move black wanted to play, but black didn't actually play there. So like it's like you responded to something that didn't actually happen. And the empty triangle isn't always bad. Sometimes there's reasons to play it, like cuts, right? If you play an empty triangle, and there happens to be a bunch of cuts that you need to fix or create with it, then it can be good. Or even sometimes it's mandatory for making liberties in certain corner joseki, certain sequences in the corner, because it's just the only move that allows you to get more liberties later on.
Right.
It's the middle of battle, and a move like this, playing a contact move like that doesn't really help white achieve anything, and it's not particularly good shape. It's an inefficient shape, while also giving black Sente an initiative to go destroy the big influence white has.
Right. And I think though, so to your point is as well, and the introduction, I think MrCat was concerned that if MrCat played elsewhere, that in the exchange that would happen, white could connect. I'm guessing MrCat was looking at something like this and was worried that would be too much. And so so that's where this is connected. But one of the things that you want to consider is in in this potentially forcing move, you end up connected, but that still allows your opponent to get an extra move, and sometimes that can be worth it or not worth it. I think in this case, like you were saying, when you look at the overall board, that kind of move or that kind of the C16 play specifically to avoid that becomes smaller, becomes too small. It does prevent that particular variation, but it isn't working you toward the rest of the board and the larger picture.
And if we mean something is too small, that means there's things on the board that both players can take or do that are worth more points because there may be better development or better. It gives you more territory or even more influence, and that outcome is worth more than what you get somewhere else. Because in this position, I would consider this settled at this point. Neither group is really in danger of dying or getting attacked, and you should be looking for. And there's nothing urgent here that either person really needs to do.
Right.
So because of that, White should look to play elsewhere.
So we're coming up. We're getting close to about an hour, so I want to move a little bit quicker. But I wanted to talk a little bit more about move efficiency in these upcoming moves, and get your help with that, because I think this is a really good example. So we have this move here. We have black. I know there's a lot we could probably say on the way this plays out, but just if we look at the real basics of this for a moment, in move efficiency, we have white that is heavily concentrated in this one area, and the goal, I think, for MrCat is, I think I can kill this entire black group. I think I can kill these stones, and that may very well may be possible, but if we look at the amount of moves required to even try and do this, it's too many.
Yeah.
And what is white getting? White hasn't even captured anything yet and is making stones that are in a weak group, whereas Zero...
You could also argue that just letting White kill those groups isn't big enough because Black will get a side, but
exactly,
too many invasions. I think there's too many invasions at this point, so Black should probably save the group. But I don't think E18 is the correct move here. I think that one's actually too small locally. It feels better to protect your side real quick.
Yep.
So instead of E18 feels bigger to play at Q10, for example.
Right, Q10 is an alternative.
Either way, the point remains that Black is building something massive, and White's, although capturing something, isn't really getting nearly as much out of the exchange.
Yeah, I think the difference here is really significant. Add on to the fact that if we see this pan out, we have White really, really just laser focused on trying to kill. And the issue here is... Well, there are a couple issues. We'll see this. In trying to get out, not only is White going to fail in killing the group, White is going to jeopardize their own group, and they're going to lose all those stones. So the whole thing ends up backfiring. But
yeah,
I think it's a really another really important basic aspect of attacking, just to touch on that briefly, is that in this case, this is a good example of when you attack, you have to be careful, because if you are too recklessly aggressive or just too reckless, you can end up exposing your own, you end up leaving openings. And if you cannot make that kill, or you cannot put enough pressure that your opponent is always on the defensive, if it ever gets turned like it gets turned right here, then all those corners you cut to try to be the aggressor suddenly get turned on you. And it doesn't, sometimes you can recover, but here is a really great example of how devastating it can be if you try to attack without being able to really being able to see it through.
It's funny because there's an even better move, and I could harp on, just play D18, nerd.
Right.
In this case, D18 is actually more efficient because you gain an extra point.
Right. So the you can absolutely kill with B19. D18
Yeah,
gives you
because white should just play away. White shouldn't be playing stones here because they should read it out and say, "Oh, this doesn't work. I should play elsewhere." Right.
Right.
So if white continues to play, black should play the move that gives them the extra point here,
Right.
and white should still not play here.
Right. So B19 and the follow up with A8, then A18 is required. But with B18 here, this is definitely one of those times where, you know,
Yeah, it
on a
doesn't really matter
fundament,
that
on like
much.
on a basic level, it's not wrong. You're going to kill the stones, but on a higher strategy level, rulers saying that these stones, if you're certain, as we are, that these stones are dead, rather than spend one extra move to kill them when you already know that they're dead. Instead, this play at B18 or D18 still ensures that they're dead and makes sure that your C17, C18 group are connected and give you potentially another point or two. And so for the same move, for doing the exact same thing. And so that move efficiency, if you're just starting out, it's obviously fine that you decide to kill it. But when after as you start to get more comfortable in the game, one of those big areas of improvement are figuring out where you can play a little bigger, where you can play a little faster, where you can be a little more efficient and do more things at once while not sacrificing any of the integrity of your groups. So I think that's a great point for D18. But we have the capture. So I did want
Wrong
to.
side.
It's wrong side. I also wanted to mention it because I was trying to figure out like when might you do these deep dives, and so there is a Joseki, there is a standard variation where if there was something like an 017 stone here already, you could do S16, which is still deep.
I prefer, in this case, I would do the submarine invasion, which is one to the side. So at S15, I think. Yeah, it looks like S15. So I generally prefer to do the submarine invasion, and they do the same. They have the same goal at targeting the weakness at the 3-3 point. If you haven't noticed this already, the 3-3 point is a very important point when it comes to invading the corner. It's very vital because it often is a way to very easily live.
Corners are very easy to build life in because you need less stones to build eyes there. But the same principle is the same. You play a stone that can develop to the side or can develop into the corner.
Right. So off of that, this is one variation. If you play here and black plays down, you can simply play out. Whoops. Or if you start here, I teleported. If instead black tries to surround, you have the option to play inside in exactly that 3-3 point, and look to. So you have some options here for separating out the stones and still getting inside. Or as Ruler's saying, the S15 is one variation.
But I just prefer the submarine because the side's so open, so it's very valuable. So the reason that we know which move we prefer is because we know the outcome of the moves. These are just common sequences, right? So if we apply these Joseki to the position, we can envision how it will play out for us. And in this position, I think if you play directly under, you're way more likely to just have to run, right?
Right.
At least in the variation you play, you have to start running. Whereas playing at B here, pretty close to guarantees life and splits up both groups. So I think it's a better outcome.
Right. And I think that's a really good argument for it. One of the things that it can be useful is just that there are a couple, as you were saying too, there are different variations that can, or there are different ways in which you can play that have different standard outcomes. Conversely, I think that S17 is trying to do kind of something in between here, between this a submarine invasion certainly, or really between this S16 or the 3-3 point at R17, but it ends up kind of doing neither, which is important because when black...
It allows black to take the 3-3. White should take the 3-3 instead. Well, I think white can actually get out here. White's actually fine. oh, they play the wrong way.
Right.
Uh-oh.
So that's the other thing too that I think is worth mentioning. When you're in this situation, you have to ask yourself, which direction am I going to play? What is my purpose? What is my goal here? MrCat in the moment I think was trying to save the corner and played at R19. If we take a second, let's just see how that plays out.
Yeah, and so the big issue for white here is that um, by even so assuming black white didn't even save, right? Let's say white didn't save R16 and said that they're alive in the corner. They're not, because the shape of the corner is already dead. It's a square 4 shape, and that shape is unconditionally dead. Black doesn't even have to play there to kill it. And the worst part is that um, it's gote to play in there for white to try and save it.
Right. And white is, you know, I think, for example, I think white was hoping that they could just
Still dies, yeah, but they're a turn behind.
Sorry, there we go. That they would, in this way, then white would have 2 eyes or 2 spaces that could not be taken simultaneously. They would be alive. I think that's what MrCat was looking for, but like you said, MrCat was a move behind, and so Zero can simply take. And now, instead of
Tombstone.
what MrCat was hoping for, you've got the situation where these 3 stones are dead. These 2 stones are not dead, but they're kind of out in the middle of nowhere. Right, they need to run.
Yeah, they're running.
So conversely, in a situation, if you find yourself in a situation like this, I was thinking, you know, comparing the 2 directions, that going up means you're trying to save the corner. And if you can absolutely save the corner, that's one thing. Whether it's worth it is a separate question. If you can't, you can still play down, and you are sacrificing or potentially sacrificing that R18 stone up here, but that would be because your goal is that you can get more done this direction. You can use these stones; they still have a purpose, and so I think that would be something to consider if you find yourself, rather than just committing to trying to save it all.
Yeah. So it's also important to note that the R18 stone isn't that important for white to live.
Mm-hmm.
As much as they need, they don't need it to make eyes. What they really need right now is to either fix their cuts so that they live, or get out further so that they can develop the side so they have more space to live.
Right.
And because of that, R19 doesn't really do either of those, so it gets them killed.
I think I think that's a really great, if I can add on to that, one of the things that I was taught that I've tried to carry with me as I continue learning is you don't have to understand, you don't have to have all the answers. The game is extremely complex. We're all still learning. One of the things, even if you're wrong, though, I think it's really important that you approach it with intentionality. You may not know what the best move is, you may not know what the proper move is, but you can still say, well, I played here because for X, Y, and Z, or I went in this direction because this is what I think. And if you can do that with every move, you can be 100% wrong, but that allows, you know, Ruler, myself, other people who maybe have a little more experience relative to your level to say, okay, you know, maybe your thought process and your intention was right, but the execution was wrong, or maybe the thought process doesn't really work here because X, Y, Z. So I think as you're starting out, it can be very overwhelming to have all those possibilities, and it's fine if you're not going to get them all right. I make mistakes all the time in every game, but understanding the why or having a reason for doing something allows you to have a lot more growth and allows you to I think make the games more satisfying. Let's go ahead. If we move through the rest of it here, and just look at because there's not much more. I really want to get your thought on on the way this game ends up playing out by the end of it. Because I think you did a really wonderful job sort of breaking down a lot of the core fundamentals here, which is why at this point, looking at the way it ended up, just your thoughts on some of the way the board state looks, and the situation that both players found themselves in.
Yeah, it looks like white got themselves killed. Even though they had a lot of power, they didn't protect it, so they ended up getting entirely surrounded because they got cut. That's what it looks like,
Yeah.
to me at least.
I think that's a great point. And sort of in addition to that, I think another thing that you were mentioning that we've talked about in other reviews. So white had in this on the left hand side, for example, white had a lot of influence. They had a lot of stones that could be utilized in a lot of different ways. But what black was able to do, white wasn't able to capitalize on that and use those stones to be aggressive, to play further, and to start to build a framework to work from. Instead, what Zeronix was able to do successfully here was to play in a way that prevented white from being able to really utilize those stones, and kind of made them just a giant ball. I mean, a giant wall, but with nothing to really show for it. And so it just became a lot of stones in all concentrated in the area, not doing much. And that was done by some strategic placement of stones in this area. Sort of these
He
two.
didn't protect the peep. Oh no!
He
This
didn't
is when you
protect the peep.
notes, yeah.
That
The
would
peep
be
would have. That peep is mean. It
so.
doesn't. Yeah, if you protect, you can't actually protect that peep. Because if you do, you just. At least in this case, from this board position, it's no good.
Right. Right. And so I think the other thing too that I wanted to mention as well is I think I'm going to cheat because I've looked at this a couple times, so I can. I think one of the other things that I think is really common with newer players or players with less experience is that you have MrCat in this example really, it looks like to me, trying to kill this lower right group. And similar to how we were talking about in the upper left, it was done in such a way that as soon as the pressure falls off, there are suddenly so many weaknesses, meaning so many places here that white has had to cut corners to try to keep this pressure up. When it's clear that black is all right, now white is unlikely to be able to salvage it all, and is in danger of losing it, of starting to get counterattacked. And I think that's a really big. It's something to be really aware of when you go to attack. That if you attack if you just attack, if your only goal is to attack, then if it doesn't work out, you suddenly find yourself in this difficult position. Whereas if we look at the way that MrCat has it, say something like this. If we look at the way this is, MrCat currently still has a framework that they've got in this lower center. If that were the focus and they were trying to do something this way, rather than just focused on trying to kill this group in the lower corner, then maybe there's some possibilities there. You are also still building something here, but you have to recognize that that there are other possibilities or other opportunities besides this one attack focused on this group. In doing so, you have some potential here. You could be doing something big here, but you've got to be able to recognize that and either shift gears or begin to make use of it. And I think that sort of like, again, what you were talking about up here on this left-hand side, there were absolutely some opportunities that MrCat could utilize. And I think in the future, keeping an eye out for those instances where that attack is ended and you have something you can build from, could have helped MrCat really get back into the game, make it a lot more even. But I think the constant attack meant that they weren't looking at the larger, or they didn't seem to be looking at the larger picture, and so you have a lot of this potential that ends up left on the board.
And I think it's also important to understand why you should attack and when you should attack and go. Generally speaking, you shouldn't try and attack to kill things and go unless you're significantly stronger, because as you mentioned, you're left with a bunch of weaknesses that you really can't cover for at the end of it. Because if both players are responding to the moves, right, neither should really be in danger. The end of it, I should say. However, if you try to overextend yourself, even though y'all are equal, you'll end up putting corners and creating weaknesses that you can't save, right?
Exactly.
So generally, when we attack, we either attack when there's a definitive discrepancy, and by that I mean either a shortage of liberties, so like something that could be threatened a bunch to maybe give you free moves on the inside to kill the group, or maybe you're vastly stronger than the group, so you have 2 walls and then there's one tiny stone in the middle, right? That stone's be killed, right? Um, like this. If there's that. Well, then yeah, we can try and kill that white group in there, because there's just not enough ways for white to actually get out because they don't have enough power. A third way is actually attacking for profit, and what we mean is attacking groups in a way that you profit elsewhere. And generally, this fixes the issue of killing because you're putting stones in a very harmonious way to work together and build something while also attacking. And that's a very efficient way to attack.
Right. Again, that idea that you're fulfilling several objectives at once. Since it's a turn-based game, you each get the same number of moves. The more you can get done in a single move, the more that you can get done over your opponent in a single move, the more advantageous you'll often be.
Yes.
Anything else that you want to add?
Shout outs to Jay, Midnight Jester. He's a streamer on Twitch, and I basically dedicated this video to him. Smiles.
Well, if you're a fan of chess, Wargroove, or turn-based games in general, I highly recommend taking a look at the Groove of War channel. They've got Wargroove, obviously, but also chess replays from the tournament. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Thank you, Ruler, for joining me.
No problem.